Good morning, students. In previous class, we discussed about 4 separating techniques of measures. Today, we are going to discuss about another 4 separating techniques. Let's start.
In previous class, we discussed about 4 separating techniques. Today, we are going to discuss about another 4 types of separating techniques. The first one, separation of dyes in black ink. Did you remember? In previous class, we separate dye from ink through the evaporation process. Here we are going to separate dyes in black ink. Then second one, separation of a mixture of 2 miscible liquids. In previous class, we separate 2 immiscible liquids. Here, miscible liquids. Third one, separation of different gases from air. We are going to separate different gases from air. We know that there are different types of gases in air like oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, etc. So, we are going to separate it. The fourth one, separation of pure copper sulfate from an impure sample. Here we are taking impure sample of copper sulfate and give purification to it. Let's start. The first one is separation of dyes in black ink. The separation of dyes in black ink through the chromatography. In previous class, we studied separate dye from water through the evaporation process. That there is a dye is a mixture of different colors. So we want to separate it. We want to separate each single colors from a dye. Here we want to separate the black color. There will be different types of dyes in a single black color ink drop. So we want to separate it. Let's do an activity. Here we take a thin strip of filter paper. Draw a line on it. Draw a line on the filter paper using a pencil and approximately 3 cm line. And put a small drop of ink at the center of the line. Let it dry. After that, dip it to a jar or glass beaker or test tube. The drop of ink on it. Look at this picture. There is a drop of ink on the filter paper. And put the paper just above the water level. Watch carefully what happened. Yes, the filter paper absorbed the water. Here, the filter paper absorbs the water. When the water catches the filter paper, water moves upward. The water moves upward and the water-soluble colors move upward with water. Look at the second picture. As the water rises on the filter paper, it takes along with it the dye particles. Usually, a dye is a mixture of 2 or more colors. The colored component that is more soluble in water. More soluble color components rises faster and in this way the colors get separated. So, this process of separation of components of a mixture is known as chromatography. This process is called chromatography. And from this we can understand that the ink has water as a solvent and dye is soluble in it. As water rises on the filter paper, it takes along dye particle with it. Dye is a mixture of two or more colors. Then the fourth point, the colored component more soluble in water rises faster and color gets separated. Then what is chromatography? The process of separation of components of a mixture. The process of separation of components of a mixture. This technique is used for separation of those solutes that dissolve in the same solvent. So from this we should understand that what is the process of chromatography. We know that the chromatography is the process of separation of the components of a mixture. And what is the applications? It used to separate colors in a dye, to separate pigments from natural colors. It used to separate pigments from natural colors. Second one, how can we separate a mixture of two miscible liquids? Here we take acetone and water as miscible liquids. Let's do an activity. Take the mixture in a distillation flask. Look at this picture. This is a distillation flask. Fit it with a thermometer. And here we are going to give heat. There is a mixture of acetone and water. Here we using the thermometer to take the temperature, to find out the temperature. At a particular temperature, the acetone vaporizes and it condenses. So, it will collect in a condenser outlet. The boiling point of acetone and water different. So, at a particular temperature, the acetone vaporizes. The water is left behind in the distillation flask and we collect the acetone in a condenser outlet. Here we using the technique distillation process. What is distillation? It is used for the separation of components of a mixture containing two miscible liquids and the boiling point should be different. The another technique is fractional distillation. It is used to separate the mixture of two or more liquids for which the difference in boiling point is less than 25 Kelvin. Example, separation of different gases from air, different fraction from petroleum products, etc. The next one, how can we obtain different gases from air? We know that there are different types of gases in air. The air is homogeneous mixture. There are different types of gases like oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, etc. We are going to separate the gases through the fractional distillation process. Here we first compress the gases. Look at this picture. Here we are going to separate oxygen from air. The air is compressed by increasing pressure. Here we first compress the air by increasing pressure and cooled by decreasing temperature. And the air changed into liquid air. The gaseous air changed into liquid air. This liquid air is allowed to warm up slowly in a fractional distillation column. Here the liquid air slowly warm up in a fractional distillation column where the gases separate at different heights depending upon the boiling point. In the fractional distillation column, the gases separated. This is the third separating technique. Then the fourth one, how can we obtain pure copper sulfate from impure sample? Here we are doing an activity. We take impure sample of copper sulfate in a china dish. Dissolve it in minimum amount of water. So, the impure copper sulfate mix with a minimum amount of water and filter the impurities using filter paper and evaporate the water from copper sulfate solution to get a saturated solution and cover the solution with the filter paper and allow it cool undisturbed for a day. The process is called crystallization. This type of process is called crystallization. It is the process that separates a pure solid in the form of its crystal from a solution. We can change into impure crystal into pure crystal. This method is used to purify solids. An example, salt from seawater. This you can see here we are separating copper sulfate impurities. We separate the impurities from copper sulfate. We can use this method for the purification of salt from seawater. This is all about our different types of separating techniques.
So, we studied about 8 different separating techniques of mixtures. So, you should know about the separating techniques. So, you just read your textbook to know detailedly about these separating techniques. Thank you.